Well, nothing quite as Christmas like a red sleigh being pulled through the sky by a reindeer with a glowing red nose. Ho 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 and welcome, I'm Grim Grindle, which you know because you just saw me in a previous segment, and I'm here to bring you a very Christmassy Christmas special of Build Request. Although, not really, because no one actually requested this vehicle, I just wanted to build it myself. And so, Merry Christmas me, from me, I hope you enjoy it. This idea was largely inspired by Jackson Percy, who made a comment or suggestion about how to build a more accurate pod racer by using the sticky ball to drag the controller, and as soon as I read it, I instantly knew what I was going to do with it. And hey, while it's not quite a pod racer, if Santa Claus really does deliver a present to every single child in one night, which of course he does, there's no doubt that his sleigh would win the Boonta Eve race. But before we deal with any racing, Star Wars or otherwise, let's first talk about the building process. Despite not having any elves to help me, the actual construction of this vehicle was not too difficult. I have, as you might be aware, been doing throughout this year, the Nuts and Bolts Challenge bots and drones, which utilizes the remote control glitch, and so when it came to the building of this vehicle, I didn't really have to relearn too much to make it work. I did have a short back and forth as I tried to refresh myself what was going on, but it really didn't take much time, and the technical side of this vehicle was done in 13 minutes, and that's including the goofing around in the test arena. I'm not going to explain how the remote control glitch works, because at this point I've done it ad nauseum, and if you do want a tutorial on that, it's already available to you as one of my builder's guides to Nuts and Bolts. But rather simply, on the technical side, Santa's sleigh utilizes the remote control glitch, in which the remote controlled part is a jet plane that prior to disconnecting shoots a sticky ball backwards, and so when connecting that sticky ball to the controller part, which also doubles as a cockpit, allows you to drag around the control part, which doubles as a cockpit, as if it's a sled being dragged by a force. But technicalities are not everything. If you fell a tree and drag it inside during December, it might well technically be a Christmas tree, but unless you trim it, it's not exactly going to really embody the Christmas spirit. And so let's get trimming this sleigh, because at the moment it looks like something that the Green Goblin from Spider-Man might use, which is definitely not really what I'm going for. Like any logical insane person does, when they have a perfectly good work in progress, I decided to start from the beginning. I actually did so because I now knew exactly what I wanted and exactly what it needed to have to function, and I figured it would be quicker and easier to start from the beginning and just incorporate the design into the new build rather than having to build the sleigh around it. First, I started by building the sled part of Santa's sleigh, which is arguably one of the most important parts. Without it, Santa would have nowhere to sit and he would have nowhere to put the presents, which would make his job that much more difficult. I put a small box in the back so he would have a place to put the video game I asked for, and I painted the whole thing red because it's Santa's sleigh. I don't think I really need to explain my artistic choice there. And then it was on to the reindeer. I decided I didn't want to deal with the part limit and size limit that I would no doubt run into if I tried to put all 8 there, so I instead just went for the most famous reindeer of all, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. I gave him antlers, a light bulb for the nose, painted him brown with a white mane and made sure to make the light bulb red, and overall he looked rather fantastic and rather traditional. I then started to experiment with his reins, tried to figure out where I could put the sticky ball on the build, and gave him wings and a jet engine. This is where he became slightly less traditional, but I think Santa Claus would concede that it is visionary and approve of the design completely. With quite a few back and forth alterations and a lot of fiddling, I finally got it to a version that actually managed to fly. The first flight was rather shaky and definitely not perfect, but neither was Scott Calvin's either, so I feel that I did an okay job. I then changed where Rudolph starts in comparison to the sleigh, because I found it was a lot easier to assemble it actually in the game, rather than just relying on the sticky ball hopefully hitting its mark, and gave the sled some bumpers for easy takeoff, then applied a fresh new paint of coat to both Rudolph and the sled, and Santa was finally ready to go Santa go. That's a Wiggles reference. I think overall it turned out pretty darn good. It's really difficult to handle because since all of the power comes from Rudolph, Santa's sleigh, which is actually where you are, drags behind and drifts really badly, and also because that's weighted, it also makes the handling really strange. And to add to this difficulty even further, the camera of course follows Banjo, who is in the back, not the reindeer at the front, so it's really difficult to remember not to overcorrect whenever you're going into a turn or dodging an opponent or anything. It's a lot to get used to, but it's definitely a functioning vehicle. I mean, of course it is, otherwise how would Santa do it? But is it as good as the actual sleigh in the North Pole that has Santa's seal of approval? Well, he uses that one every year to race around the entire world, and so I think the only way that we can properly judge this sleigh is by entering it into a race. And what better race is there for putting a flying vehicle through its paces than my go-to course and vehicle shakedown, Air Coconut? I'm not going to lie, I found this challenge to be extremely difficult. although it's also a lot of fun and it's extremely festive, so if you're looking for a fun nuts and bolts challenge to do this Christmas, then I highly suggest you give this vehicle a build and give it a crack. There are 3 main reasons why the challenge is so difficult. First of all, unlike all of your competitors, you actually have to set up your vehicle, so while you're making sure that your reindeer is attached to your sled, all of the other ones are flying away, but luckily since you do have jets and because it is Rudolph, you do manage to catch up quite quickly. And the second reason it's quite difficult is because, as I've said, it's very difficult to get used to the handling, and if you miss one of the hoops, you're going to have a hard time looping around and getting through it again without losing too much time. Santa's sleigh doesn't exactly have the best turning. And the third problem that Banjo-Claus runs into is that in the center of your vehicle is a darn sticky ball, which means that if you accidentally run into one of your competition, chances are they're going to get stuck to your vehicle and cause all sorts of problems, and this same issue occurs if you run into practically anything else. In one of the races, I was doing quite well until, unfortunately, I picked up a Yuletime log, and that was basically the end of the race for me. But I persisted, and eventually I succeeded because it's Christmas, and Christmas is the time for miracles. So let's have a look at my successful run. Firstly, as with all remote control vehicles, it's important to set up your controls before you start the race so the game doesn't accidentally get confused and put 2 different functionalities on the one button, and when you go to do one thing, you find your whole vehicle falling apart. So with that necessarily avoided, it was time to get down to the more physical assembly of the vehicle. I, as you can see, got disturbingly good at lining up my reindeer and pushing my sled into position. I think that probably stands as a testament to just how many times I repeated this challenge. I am especially happy with how the vehicle takes off because it looks like the way practically every single Christmas special ever taught me it's supposed to. And then we're airborne, and I really love how this vehicle looks while flying. It didn't take too long to catch the crowd, but unfortunately, as you can see, when everything was going right, I missed one of the hoops and had to double back. Luckily at this point, I'd had a lot of practice doing so because I had missed so many hoops before, and as you can see, I've even gotten good at just dipping the tail into the hoop rather than having the whole vehicle go through it, because since that's the part with Banjo in it, that's the only thing that actually needs to go through. And so, with that hoop re-looped and following a quick U-turn, it was time to try to once again catch up with the pack. And because I have a magical flying reindeer on my side, it wasn't long until I was cutting through the pack like a warm chainsaw through a year-old Christmas cake, and this is where we saw the breadth of my opponent's hatred of Christmas clearly displayed. Who fires rockets at Santa? That's just not in the spirit of the season. Luckily though, due to Banjo-Claus's superior piloting skills, the mistletoe missiles were quickly avoided and we were back on track. And as we are going back on track, I'd like to point out at this point that the vehicle's not actually going at full speed. I am definitely not putting the pedal to the metal simply because I'm trying to keep control of it. It is really quite easy to overcorrect in the vehicle, and after failing this challenge so very many times, I'm just trying to finish the race. And so if you do want to try the challenge yourself, a faster run than mine should definitely be possible. And so to find the layer by layer of Santa's sleigh and to copy the vehicle, it's not going to be at the end of this video as normal because it's going straight into the next segment because it's the Christmas special, but instead a link to it can be found in the description below. But before that, we have a race to finish and we're about up to the most difficult part in the entire race when doing this challenge, which is of course the nosediving part, because as you can imagine, a non-powered heavy sleigh sitting behind the acceleratory part of your vehicle while going into a nosedive actually falls and creates its own momentum, which makes steering really quite difficult. I thought for sure, having missed this hoop, I had lost the race. It definitely would not have been the first time, and I can tell you what, I had some colourful things to say about that darn cloud. But I was one with the Christmas spirit, looped around, realigned, and went on a straight descent leading through the final hoops on my way to the finish line. And that, Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts fans, is how I, Grim Grindle, saved Christmas. And not only did I save Christmas, but I did it in a Trophy Thomas time. Thanks for watching for the second segment in a row, and as always, again, I have been and still am Grim Grindle.